Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowdon Deli. My name is Aaron Rand. I am here with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, Lesley Chesterman, and our special guest today, Conservative Party of Quebec leader Éric Duhaime. Mr. Duhaime, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for welcoming me.
So you complete the triad. We had Paul St. Pierre Plamondon, we had Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, and now we have you. And I will start with the question that I think a lot of people are asking as far as provincial politics is concerned. The PQ has been gaining an awful lot of strength. The CAQ has been losing that support, yet the Conservatives remain pretty much where they've always been. Why do you think that is?
Well, first off, for us, it's a good news because we have no members in the National Assembly, very little visibility if you compare to the other parties, and still we're at the same point. If there were an election today, we would have as much vote as we got in the last election, and even better, because of the vote splitting in the Quebec City region, we would get between 5 and 10 members of the National Assembly elected. So for us, it's not bad. But obviously, we'll need to have more visibility, and it's very tough when you're outside of the National Assembly to get as much visibility from the press gallery. But we're doing other things. We're trying to do politics differently. I just came back from Alberta. I spent the last week in Alberta. We're trying to do other things that are different to use the opportunity outside of Parliament to make our ideas move forward.
Hold on a sec. Why is a Quebec provincial politician going to Alberta exactly? What was the...
Well, first off, we're still in Canada as far as I'm concerned, and it's very important to build bridges with our partners in other provinces. Over the last year, Alberta has been at the forefront of the autonomy of provinces in Canada. The province, under Danielle Smith's leadership, adopted a bill, the Sovereignty Act in a United Canada, and they challenged some decisions from the federal government where they won. There was also in Saskatchewan. They did the same thing. They've adopted Saskatchewan first. Yeah. They refused to collect the carbon tax on their territory. They're doing things very differently than Legault, who's sending letters to Mr. Trudeau, and that there's nothing going on per se. For example, in immigration, and I think that's not the way to go. I think I like the approach out west. I wanted to talk with those people. I want to unite the small C Conservatives who have always been more decentralist within Canada, that understand Canada is a great country, but there's very different realities from one region to the other, and we need to respect that. And the federal government needs to make sure they take care of their own business, but not the business of the provinces.
But Danielle Smith is not a small C Conservative; she's a big C Conservative, and a lot of her values would not wash well in Quebec at all.
Well, when she's talking about autonomy, obviously, I think it resonates with a lot of Quebecers. She's probably much closer to many Quebecers than the provincial Liberals per se, or the federal Liberals certainly. And I think that's what, the policies of Alberta, I'm not going to comment, because that's the business of Albertans to decide who they want to represent them and which kind of policies they want to move forward. But in terms of relationship in Canada, I think it is important. She has a great view, and it's a problem in Canada. It's not. We need to have better links as Quebecois. We need to understand that there's other realities and other allies potentially outside of Quebec, and we need to build bridges. I think the separatists have never been doing that because they're looking for a failure, because they want to separate, and the federalists, they always think that they take it for granted that the rest of Canada is anti-separation, so they never took care of their relationship with other provinces. I think it's important to invest because it's our greatest allies.
So let me bring up the idea. Yeah. To Bill's point, though, I get the sense Danielle Smith, if she could, would pull Alberta out of Canada.
Right.
I know you're talking about autonomy, and that's a different situation. Yeah. It's kind of like separatism versus autonomy, and people wonder where that line kind of crosses. So is that, you're not a separatist. You don't want Quebec to separate. You don't want a referendum either, I guess.
No, but I want the Constitution of this country to be respected. When the federal government is intervening in provincial jurisdiction, I'm the first one to say it's not fair. It's not fair when it concerns us in Quebec, and we're very loud when it happens, but it's not fair when it happens in Alberta, when they're doing it with their natural resources, for example, which is a provincial jurisdiction. I think they have a point there, and by supporting them, it's going to be easier for us to get supported when we are attacked by the federal government. We want to do, as an example, as Conservatives in Quebec, we want to reform the healthcare system. I think there's a huge problem in Quebec. We need to introduce some competition to make sure the patients have better care, and we're taking the model of the best models in the world, in Europe in particular, and we want to import it in Quebec. But even if health is a provincial jurisdiction, the federal government is always threatening us that if our program was applied, they would use the Canada Health Act to deprive us from doing our reforms, which makes no sense for me. It's a provincial jurisdiction. It's Quebec voters and Quebec government who should decide, and we would need the support of Alberta and other provinces if ever we're attacked.
How closely are you aligned with the policies of Mr. Poilievre?
Well, I like Pierre Poilievre. I've known him for 30 years. He's a good friend. I'm a member of the Conservative Party of Canada. I will vote for him in the next federal election, but I'm not going to tell Quebecers how to vote. I think everybody's smart enough to figure out what they want to do. But I hope there's going to be a change in Ottawa, and I think that it's going to be better for Quebec because Conservatives by nature, historically, have always been more decentralist than the Liberals in Ottawa or the NDP. And I think it's important to have a government that respects the provinces a little better than the current government.
Yet you remember, of course, not that long ago, François Legault came out and encouraged Quebecers to vote for Aaron O'Toole, and that didn't work out so well. So.
No, very well, because it's not his job to tell people how to vote, first off. Secondly, he wasn't able to convince even his closest supporters and even advisors, who are all people from the Parti Québécois, who all vote for the Bloc Québécois at the federal level. So it was not a huge success, and I don't think it's the job of a premier to tell his citizens how to vote federally. I think people don't accept that. They want to have their own autonomy as well.
I want to go back to what I started with, which
Yes.
was the rise of the PQ, the rise of Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, because we're all sort of, as they say, in this together. I know your contention is, okay, let's say you voted PQ. We know that if there was an election today, the polls tell us that the PQ would win and likely win a majority. And we know that on day one, they would, of course, pitch the idea of a referendum. Now, the idea is, well, that's all well and good because there's only 35% support right now for sovereignty, and it's been that way for many, many years. My concern is, it's 35% today. If it goes up, and maybe Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon can convince people that it should, he's a pretty smart guy, and it's at 40% or 45%, then what?
Well, that's why we have to make sure that the Parti Québécois is not elected in the first place. And even today, if there were an election, you're right, he would be elected, but only with 32% of the votes. We've never seen that. I mean, historically, the PQ would lose badly when they were at 41%. The only reason why they could get elected at 32% is because now we're split in 5 parties at the provincial level. And you're also right about the fact that there's only 35% of Quebecers who would vote yes. But if you ask Quebecers, do you want a referendum? It's probably even more than 70%, or it's probably 80 or 90% who say we don't want a referendum in the first place. And that's what I'm working for. My plan
Well, why do you believe
not
that? Why do you believe that if you just asked the average person on the street, that number would be so high?
Well, because we have the worst deficit, and Mr. Legault even said last Sunday that it's going to be even worse than expected. We have the worst deficit in our history. We have a healthcare system that is in trouble, like big time. We have our education system that is in very, very bad shape right now. I think we should focus on what concerns people. We have the immigration crisis right now with the refugees. We have a housing crisis in Quebec that we've never seen in our lifetime. Why is the priority to have a third losing referendum? Because that's what it would be. Is that our priority? We've been splitting ourselves between Québécois for way too long. We need to unite Quebecers, not divide them. We have huge challenges ahead of us, and it's not the constitutional status that is at stake. It's our healthcare system, it's our economy, it's our education system. That's what people are concerned about. And I hate to say it, but Mr. Coderre on the other side with the Liberals, they're as bad because they're already preparing. They already have a slogan for the no campaign. Mr. Coderre already says that he's going to be the champion, the captain no. Like they're feeding that they want a referendum. Me, I'm not a yes, I'm not a no. I'm an anti-referendum, period. We should not go there. We've suffered enough. Quebecers, it's not just the people who voted no, who voted yes, who lost the referendum in 1980 and 1995. All Quebecers lost. We came out of those 2 exercises, and our Quebec was weaker after the referendum than before. Why should we go there for a third time? There's no sign. If ever the Quebec population wants a referendum and they want to separate, we will know. There's going to be a few million people outside in the streets. It's not the case at all right now.
So if everyone, you made some really interesting points. If in terms of policy, in terms of the real problems that Quebecers are facing, everything you mentioned is accurate. My question would then be, if that's the case, and we accept that's the case, why are the PQ gaining in popularity? Well, this is a party that wants to pull Quebec out of the country and wants to have a referendum. Everything you said, every policy, why are they gaining support?
Yesterday, Gilles Proulx, who used to be a radio host here in Montreal, the #1 radio host for many years, who's a hardcore, well-known separatist, came out saying that it's a parking lot. Like right now, people are angry at Mr. Legault, and a lot of them are former Parti Québécois supporters who went to Mr. Legault in the last 2 elections, and now they're going back home where they used to be at the Parti Québécois, but he doesn't feel that they're separatists, and it's mainly the baby boomers, that's the people a little bit more, a little bit older, and it's not going to last. I mean, I don't think it's very solid, especially not to have another referendum. I understand the political logic, though. Mr. Plamondon went up because he's able to stimulate the nostalgic of the past, and that's what he's doing, and he's been able to capture that. It's good for his fundraising, it's good to sell memberships, it's good to go up in the polls, but it's terrible for Quebec, and he's not going to win a referendum with that for sure.
Yeah. Sorry. I think there's another side to that too, which is a lot of people are happy to vote for him and pretend that it's not about a referendum. The way that a lot of people vote for Trump and say what he's saying isn't going to happen.
And that's why we have to be very cautious and we have to be very clear. Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon right now, he's a nice guy, but he's more radical than Parizeau. If you look at the policies, at the program of the Parti Québécois, his commitment to hold a referendum right away as soon as he's elected is greater than ever within the Parti Québécois, and that should be of a concern. This guy is not bluffing. There will be a referendum if he's elected, and that's why we have to make sure it doesn't happen. And if you don't want a referendum, you can't vote for him. That's why, and I saw it in Jean Talon. There was a by-election in Quebec City a few months ago, and a lot of people who voted conservative in the last election, even when I met them door to door, and they were telling me, "Oh, we want to get rid of the CAQ, and the PQ candidate can win, so I'm going to vote for the PQ candidate just to beat the CAQ." In a by-election, you can do that. In a general election, you cannot do that.
Right, but you can also vote, and he could end up losing the referendum, and you say, okay, well, that's done. Let's move on.
Well, do we really need to go there? I mean, do we really want a third referendum?
Right.
It's a painful exercise.
It's expensive.
It's expensive, and it's going to focus all our energy on something that is leading us nowhere. It's a cul-de-sac. And, we have way other issues. If everything was great in Quebec and if everything was perfect, maybe we could waste some time and money, but it's not the case.
We could take it off the back burner for a while, though. That's what happened with the other referendum.
But what's to prevent a second? I mean, if they lose one referendum, is there some law that says they can't have a second?
I don't know. Like, the people are laughing.
Expensive.
Is it a 3 out of 5 or a 4 out of 7? It's a hockey
It's a
series.
playoffs, exactly.
Playoffs.
But your point is, for the most part, and most pundits agree, it has less to do on certain levels with the popularity of Mr. Plamondon than the disenchantment with Monsieur Legault. And like you say, a parking lot is probably an apt metaphor for all of this. But how does that play into your favor, you think?
Why wouldn't, to his question, why wouldn't have that helped you in Jean Talon? If the anger was against the CAQ, why didn't they vote
it's a
conservative?
constituency that is historically is more PQ. It's not a conservative stronghold at all. Even the federal level, they lose that constituency.
It was a liberal stronghold.
It's a liberal stronghold, but the PQ, always had a presence that was strong, and they were able to build on that. And they had a good candidate, and there was a few debates locally that made their candidate look good, and it gave them momentum nationally. That's the thing that happened. But for us, what's important is that Mr. Legault, I think he's going down for good reasons. The Quebecers are making up their mind on Mr. Legault. They gave him 2 majority mandates. He's not delivering. If you look at what was going on in Quebec 5 years ago, can you say that something is going better than when he arrived? No, we have more deficit. Our healthcare system is in a worse shape. We can't even go and renew our driver's license properly anymore. Right. I mean, everything is broke in Quebec since he's been there. He's doing great speeches. He's looking at the polls, but he has no vision. We have no clue where he's going. Even on the constitutional issue, some people tell me he's going to be with Plamondon on the yes side. Some other people think he's going to be the Captain No. Like, it's so confused. Like, we have no clue what he stands for really. On private healthcare, for example, I was talking about private healthcare earlier. He was in the campaign saying that he would open up 3 private hospitals if he was elected. It's been a year and a half. There's nothing. He's done nothing. We don't know. He was the guy who said he would exploit our natural gas in Quebec. He would make Quebec the Norway of America. 5 years later, he passed a bill that's saying that he's not going to exploit any. It's becoming illegal now to exploit.
We know where he stands on language. We know where he stands on language.
Well, he was courting you during the last 2 elections ago, if you remember properly.
No,
he
not anymore.
flip-flopped. No, but
Not anymore.
But he flip-flopped on that issue as well, and it's endless. It's always the same thing. He's always splitting. He's looking at polls. We saw it during the last campaign. He saw a poll that says, "Oh, it's good to bash immigrants." So he was bashing immigrants for a month, and then
It's
after
all
that,
reactive.
nothing.
It's all reactive rather than proactive.
Exactly.
Essentially.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen. So let me focus on a couple of things we've talked to other provincial party leaders about. Number one, you're elected premier. What happens to the McGill tuition hikes, the Concordia tuition hikes? What do you do?
Okay. A student is a student, a Canadian's a Canadian. We live in the same country. We have the same agreements with all the provinces. I don't understand. I'm not even sure that this new legislation by the CAQ respects our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I don't think that if it was in front of a court, it would pass the test. I understand why. It's another wedge politics of the CAQ. I'm not sure that they even think it's going to be applied one day properly, because it's going to be challenged for sure. And I'm quite sure that the courts are going to call back the
So this is off the table for
it's
you?
off the table. I mean, you cannot discriminate based on language. I mean, that's purely what it is. And you cannot do that. All citizens are equal, and we need to stop that cheap politics. I see it as a wedge politics that is destroying Quebec.
So you heard the Premier also say, and Jean-François Roberge and Pascal Derry as well, no, this is being done because the way we finance universities right now is unfair. We need to get more money for the French universities, and this is a way to do it. What is your answer to that?
Well, if they want to fund the French universities, they could do it. That's something positive. Like if they want to put more funds, and if they're able to make partnership with businesses or whatever, the way they're funding it, there's ways to do it. But you cannot deprive students from their right to have access to education at the same cost as a francophone. That makes just no sense at all. And all their arguments are coming afterwards when they're getting attacked. It was not up front at the beginning because they had no clue what they were doing. And knowing Pascal Derry, I've known Pascal for years. I cannot believe that girl truly believes what she's presenting right now. I think it's pure politics.
And what about putting $1 billion or so into the Olympic Stadium here?
Well, I was very surprised because the CAQ now is saying like it's $870 million.
Yeah, but it's Quebec, so you have to double that.
But
almost double.
yeah, that's the thing. Is it going to be better to go see a concert at the Olympic Stadium? Obviously not.
No.
The seats are going to be the same. The noise is going to be as terrible.
Sound will be terrible.
Everything will be terrible. It's not a ring on top of the stadium that's going to change anything. I'm very surprised that the CAQ is refusing now to study seriously how much it would cost to destroy, to demolish the whole thing.
They say it's $2 billion, but nobody believes that.
But they have no study.
From a 20-year-old study.
Yeah, exactly. That they've upgraded. I don't know how they did that. Or also, why don't they try to find private partners? Is there someone who wants to buy the Olympic Stadium for $1 or
Maybe
whatever?
the ancient Romans.
We're having a housing problem. Is there a possibility around or with it to do something regarding housing?
Okay.
So I think we have to be more creative, but throwing another $1 billion is not the solution.
When we had Denny Kader on last week, I asked the question of Bill 21. You have the Liberal Party saying they're opposed. You have Denny Kader who wants to run for the leadership saying he's for it, although he seems to have changed his opinion a couple of times. Where are you on Bill 21?
I've always said the same thing. I think that we have peace right now with that, and the worst thing would be to reopen the can of worm. It took us years.
So you leave it in place?
I leave it as is because there's no, we need to make sure there's two things that are confronting here. It's the fact that as an individual, I want to have the right to have services that are completely outside of religious. symbols, and on the other side there's the person as an individual who wants to have its religious symbols. It's two individual rights that are confronting each other, and I think as a society we have to tell people, look, you have a right to wear all your religious symbols that you want, but if you're a public employee and if you're dealing with people who do not want to see them, well, the common agreement is that we have to live in a secular society.
So you're okay with the notwithstanding clause to enforce it?
I'm okay with the notwithstanding
Across
clause.
the board, Bill 96 as well?
No, not Bill 96. Bill 96 is another issue. Bill 96 was another bill done to poke Anglophones on the eve of the election campaign. And I don't want to scare people off, but we see the economic slowdown right now in Montreal, and I'm wondering what's the impact of Bill 96 out of this. I'm not saying that it's completely explaining the economic failure of Montreal, but there's probably a percentage there. Because a lot of people, and those businesses are not going to come out publicly and bash the government. You know how it is. The private sector never does that. It's not in their economic interest to do so. But when it's time to renew something, and when it's time to create new jobs, when it's time to move a business from one place to the other, are they taking it into account? The answer is obviously yes. It's a barrier that is useless. We're not going to say French with Bill 96. That was not the purpose. The purpose was just to score political points and be perceived as the champion of French in Quebec, and to try to steal votes from the PQ. At the time, it was the battle between the separatist PQ and the CAQ. And unfortunately, we were starting to see the impact. We talked about it at the time, but it was not real. Now we begin to see the impact, and I think that's why Bill 96 needs to be repealed.
And what about immigration?
Well, immigration, it's another issue, a very hot issue right now. We cannot say that there's not a problem. Quebec is receiving 55% of refugees right now in Canada, while we're only 22% of the population. It's way too much for our capacities. When an immigrant arrive here, we need to make sure that he can have a job, a house, health services, education services, kindergarten for his kids. Like, we need a lot of things. We're not adapted for that huge amount of people coming in within a very short period of time. There's a battle also between Ottawa and Quebec City on who's going to fund it, because it's decided by Ottawa, but it's Quebec City that ends up with the bill. And that's another problem. It creates more tension within our country.
Do you have a way to solve that?
Well, the first thing, at the Ottawa level, in the very short term, one of the things that Justin Trudeau destroyed was the fact that people coming from Mexico had visas in the old days, and under Stephen Harper. That's something that will not solve the problem, but would slow down at a certain extent, because we thought that closing Roxham Road was the solution a few months ago. Now they're not coming by crossing there; they're kind of arriving at the airport. So we didn't solve much. The other thing would be to see if Quebec could have a say in terms of immigration. You know that in 1978 and in 1991, Quebec had agreements with the federal government to have more control over our immigration. I think it was good because, first off, it satisfied the Francophones because they felt that they were more in control, so they didn't see immigrants as a threat. And it also made sure that the process was easier and more adapted for the services that are offered by the provincial governments. And I think we need to go a step further, not just for permanent immigrants, but we need also to find an agreement for the refugees, which are the problem right now.
So I want to just, if we can globally just ask the question. A lot of people, like when I've had you on the air, typically people will be texting and or calling and saying, you know what, I really like Éric Duhaime. I like the way he sounds. I like what he's talking about. But the Conservative Party of Quebec, unfortunately, and I think this, I don't know if you agree or not, has been tagged going back a few years now to the last election with the anti-vaxxers, the conspiracy theorists that were all part of that group. I think that's been a tough thing to shake.
You're right. It's we went through a crisis that split us all, and it's not just the Conservatives; it's everybody in Quebec. Families were destroyed because of that crisis, and it takes time for the dust to settle. That being said, the reason why we had the position that we had in the last crisis is because, as Conservative, we do believe in democracy, we do believe in civic rights, we do believe in individual freedoms. And when you want to deprive citizens from their rights and their freedoms, you need to be more than 100% sure. And that's where we were in disagreement with the government. And it's not an accident that we were the only party against the way it was managed. It's because we have those principles that are very important to us, and I hate to say it, but time is proving that we were right on many of those issues. We should have been a little bit more cautious. We should have respected a little bit more people's right to choose. We should have respected a little bit more civic rights of all citizens. We will have one day or the other, we'll need to do an evaluation of what happened. I arrived from Alberta. I met Preston Manning, the former leader of the official opposition in Ottawa. He was hired by the Alberta government, and they did a kind of a commission to see what are the conclusions that we can, not to blame anyone. What was done in good faith by everybody, okay, but what could we do to improve things in the future? And he came out with 3 main proposals. One on how should we declare a state of emergency? Because it should not be just on health concern, that we have to take everything into account when you declare a state of emergency. So how could we have a unit that's going to be responsible for that with criteria that are very clear? The second conclusion is on the healthcare system. How come our healthcare system was not able, with such a small crisis, in terms of numbers, it was not like, a few 100,000 people running to the hospitals. How come we were not able to answer the question, and we had to shut down the economy to make sure that the healthcare system was surviving? And the third part of these recommendations are on civic rights. How could we, if there's another crisis, no matter if it's health crisis or other things, how could we better protect individual rights and civic rights? And so it's a very important, we didn't do that exercise in Quebec, and I think it's important to do it.
To Aaron's question, though, in the next election,
yes,
okay, you must have a plan to get some seats, right? You talked about conservative stronghold, yes. So that's behind you. Last time we met, a lot of curiosity for the podcast we did with you. What's your plan for the next election to
well, it's going to be the economy, obviously, because we're such in a state where people, are really badly affected by inflation. The cost of living is going up the roof. People are really concerned. Taxes are also a problem. The deficit, we're going to see it next month in the budget on March 12th. I think that's the basis of the next election campaign. In terms of the English community also, I think it's going to be an important election. We see that the Liberals are very weak. They're not going to have a leader for another year at least. And for the first, this is one of the things that I'm the most proud of in the last election, is that in places like here in Darcy-McGee, we were able to get over 23% of the vote. Constituencies who used to vote 95, 91, 92% for the Liberals, we were able to offer the non-francophones in Quebec a true alternative. And I think for a democracy, that's very important. No matter what you think of me or the Conservative Party, you need to have some challengers. And the fact that the Liberals take you for granted is because they feel that there's nobody who can steal their seats. And it's going to be important in the next election for us to make a breakthrough in English Quebec, in non-francophone Quebec. Even if we just win one seat, we need to send a signal that those people, there are votes that you need to take care of. It's a community that has its concerns, and you cannot take them for granted and behave like if they don't exist and think that you have your MNAs are automatically elected because they're liberal.
But what about the Francophone areas, like around the Quebec City region, which is very conservative? What are you going to do there?
Well, in Quebec City, there's local issues. There is the economy, as I said, but there's also as you know, the transport is at the heart of all the debates in Quebec City, with a new bridge between the South Shore and the North Shore, and the tramway within Quebec City. It's two big, huge issues in Quebec City. We've seen something in Quebec City that personally I've never seen in politics. We saw a government, because it was the CAQ's stronghold, Quebec City. They got elected with 53, 54% of the vote. Within less than a year, in 8 months, they went from 52, 54 to 15%. They lost over 2/3 of their voters. Over 70% of their voters left, and we've never seen that. And so it's a region that is also usually they create waves. In Quebec City, that's how the CAQ started. That's how at the ADQ in the old days also, the federal Conservatives, that's where they elect members of Parliament. So the Quebec City region is going to be very important for us. And yes, you're right. That's where I'm going to run again, in the Quebec City region, where I ran last time. That's where we did our best scores outside of the west end of Montreal. And after Quebec City, the second place where we got more votes in terms of percentage is in constituencies like this one where we're at right now. And so those are going to be very important for us.
So I just, as we wrap up, to ask, to Leslie's point again, so we're in Darcy McGee. You talk about having done well here, better than perhaps most people thought you could. You're elected. What do you have to offer? Because people are watching this primarily who are Anglophones. What do you have to offer Anglophones here?
Well, that there are 100% citizens of Quebec, and we, I just arrived, and I'm going to do a parallel again with Alberta, because I just arrived from there, and I thought of you guys when I was there. I've met l'Association Canadienne des Franco-Albertains, the Association of Francophones in Alberta. And I used to go see them many years ago, and it was always a speech like, we're disappearing, it's not going well, we don't have the funds, the government ignores us, blah, blah, blah. I went back last week. The speech has completely changed. The dynamic is completely reversed. They're happy. They're opening up their 50th French school in Alberta. They have 250 programs of immersion all across the province. The number of Francophones in Alberta is growing year after year. They're dynamic. They're vibrant. And I want Anglo-Quebecers to stop have the speech like the Francophones used to have 20 years ago. And I want to hear them saying the same things as the Francophones in Alberta are saying right now. We need to and you know what? We need to make sure that the division of the past is over. The problem with the English community in Quebec is that it's like there's two Quebec. Like it's always not 100%. We need to make sure we unite them, and it's been because of politics, I think, that mainly that we are divided, because the youth on both sides is more and more bilingual, and your kids go more and more to French bilingual or immersion program, and the Francophones is the same thing. They're on the internet. They're learning English like crazy.
The Francophones the English universities in Montreal are full of Francophones.
And even the CEGEP,
Yes,
Francophone
Dawson.
University.
Yes,
Dawson is full
and
of-
some political leaders went to Anglophone universities in this city.
Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon. For me,
there you
it's
go.
hypocrisy. I know that you cannot take the personal life of someone and extend it to the politics, but when you go through an education system in English and then you want to deprive others from doing the same, for me, there's a kind of hypocrisy out there. It's the same thing with the leftists that send their kids to the private schools, but that's another debate. But the thing is that we need to be all Quebecers first and foremost. We've never been as bilingual. We've never married each other as much. Like, there's all sorts of indicators that are showing that Quebecers who are here is because they want to live in Quebec, they like the diversity, and they're allies of the French community. And I think that's what I have the most to offer. This is a kind of speech that the Anglophones and the Francophones need to hear in the near future. It's sometimes in politics, yes, it's about the policies, it's about the economy, it's about, how much we're going to lower your taxes and fix your healthcare system. But it's also an emotional feeling that we need. We need to make sure that we're all Quebecers first and foremost, and that's my challenge. And hopefully there's going to be some Anglophones who are going to answer to that.
That is our time. I want to thank you so much for joining us
Merci
today.
beaucoup. Thank you
Merci.
to you all.
That wraps up another edition of The Corner Booth. Our guest, Éric Duhaime. We'll see you again soon.